right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 9th meeting of the year. Let's get started. So here I just have the QR code for the GroupMe. If you are applying in this upcoming cycle, so this summer/fall, then I highly recommend that you join this GroupMe so that you are kind of in a camaraderie with other students who are in the same boat as you. You can ask questions, and people like me and other exec board members are also in this group in case there is someone who has a question that can't be answered. We are there to help. All right, so let's jump right into the AdSAS application. It's definitely a scary and daunting process, and I have a feeling that some people might leave this meeting a little overwhelmed, but honestly, that is what this meeting is for. It's being recorded, and come June, July, August, whenever you are applying, you can rewatch this and it will give you some guidance and clarity. All right, so what exactly is the AdSAS application? So it's essentially the Common App, but for dental school. So the Common App in terms of the centralized system that you use to apply to undergrad universities. It's a very similar concept. So in other words, you will apply to multiple schools through the single centralized portal. All dental schools utilize AdSAS and require it as the primary application. So that makes it easier because you don't have to keep track of multiple different application portals. Essentially, your entire undergrad career is documented in this portal, so don't hold back, don't be shy or modest. And in the QR code, it is an extremely helpful overview of everything that we will be talking about tonight. So let's see, I can easily switch to that screen in a moment. All right, so if you pull up that QR code, you will see this super helpful web page that basically goes through everything we're going to be talking about. So basically the starting process, the actual filling out portion, sending your transcripts, which can be a little tricky, and finally submitting it. So this is a super comprehensive place that you can always refer back to if this meeting doesn't answer all of your questions. Okay, so just some important dates to begin with so that you kind of have a rough timeline in your mind as you begin this process. So on May 12th, you can begin entering information, requesting letters of recommendation, and inputting essays. So this is kind of called like the soft open because the application is open, but you can't submit or do anything beyond just entering information until early to mid-June. So at that point, it will be the first day or time that you can submit the application. In the past, this date has been June 2nd, but due to COVID, it was changed to June 16th for this last cycle. And if I had to guess, I think that this will be the same case for the upcoming cycle, but I might be wrong. So just kind of have early June, mid-June in your mind. And like I said, you will be officially able to submit things on this date. However, you will probably hear many people say that it is highly recommended to try to submit your application as early as possible. And while this is true, don't stress yourself out in terms of submitting it during the first week or even the second week. There are plenty of students who don't even take their DAT until late July and hence submit their application early August and still have a pretty fair, shot in timeline. And ultimately, many people who follow a little later deadline will still get into dental school. And it's something that you definitely want to be proactive about. But just keep in mind that although, yes, applications are rolling, which means that the earlier you apply, the more spots are open when they read your application earlier. But that doesn't mean that if you wait until you feel fully confident to submit your application, whether that's July or August, you will still have a very fair chance. All right, so each dental school has their own deadline, but most are between October and January. So like I was just saying, although most people apply like generally early, you can submit your application all the way up until January for most schools. And then early/slash mid-December is the first round of acceptances are announced. So I have first bolded because many rounds, and there are many rounds, and you might hear back in January, you might even hear back in February, depending on, other students who decline or accept, and also depending on the timeline that you submitted your application. So if you don't hear back December 1st, December 15th, don't worry, that's why you are in that GroupMe that I showed at the beginning of this presentation, because you are all in it together and you can communicate and, help each other out. And then finally, February 3rd, which I believe is today technically, applications close completely. So I'd assume most people would be applying far beyond or before February, but just a good date to keep in mind in case. All right, so just some key points about applying. As I'm sure you all know and are unfortunately aware, applications are definitely pretty expensive. And this is a very rough estimate, but it's about $150 per school. Plus, most schools have a supplemental application fee, which is around $100. So applications per school are typically around $250 to $300. Someone can correct me wrong if they believe that this is inaccurate, but pretty sure it's right around this price point. So with that said, I would encourage you to only apply to schools that you genuinely want to attend. That is much easier said than done, but one question you can ask yourself is, would I attend an interview here? Or could I see myself renting an apartment in this city? Or, considering living expenses in a big city like Boston versus a smaller city like Columbus, how do those things compare? And a lot of people or students who are applying think that they need to know what schools they're applying to from the get-go. But from my own experience and talking to others, a lot of people don't know the exact schools that they're going to apply to until it comes time to actually, sit down and go through the application. So with that said, don't freak out if you're not 100% sure about your full list of, schools. It can kind of be a process that takes time, and we will kind of discuss that more in the future of this meeting. And so I also encourage you to shoot for a reach school. Definitely be realistic by looking at their stats and using their website to explore kind of the averages, but also be optimistic and confident because you really never know. And then some students will recommend that for interview practice, it might be beneficial to apply to a few schools so that you kind of get in the mindset and you get your nerves out, I guess. And the more interviews you do, the more comfortable you will become. But of course, this isn't the case for many people who will just apply to either one or two schools, and that is totally fine. But some people like to schedule their like dream school towards the end of their interview process so that before and leading up to that, they have had a few interviews under their belt, which will kind of, boost their confidence and self-esteem. On the right side of this screen is just a quick application guideline. You can review this on your own time if you'd like. It's just a very brief and comprehensive resource. Okay, now beyond just the basics, let's jump into the actual application portal. So what you see on my screen is the home page. So once you log in to your application individualized account, this is the screen that you will see. So in this meeting, I will go through each 4 of these sections. So I'll start with personal information and then end with program materials. Hopefully this is like a good visual reference because I remember in the past just being so overwhelmed by what information goes under which category. So I tried to make it as clear as possible. Okay, with that said, number 1 is personal information. And this is definitely, in my opinion, the most straightforward of the 4 sections, maybe besides the 4th section, which is simply submitting. As you can see, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there's a release statement, there's a biographic information section, contact info, citizenship info, environmental factors, which subcategories of that include disadvantage consideration, description of childhood residency, and relatives in dentistry. Those are kind of the key things that I took away that I think are maybe a little less common or that you would, think of. And those might require just, a couple of sentences to describe. So nothing too intensive. And then you can see parent/guardian, race and ethnicity, and then other information, which includes language proficiency. So for example, if you are minoring in a language or if you spoke a second language at home, you can kind of explain your proficiency level and just give some more details about that. This past cycle had a COVID-19 impact, and if I had to guess, that will remain on the upcoming application cycle. I forget how many characters/words you can use to describe the way that COVID impacted you, but it's definitely enough to explain whatever circumstances you were put in under. And then manual dexterity, which I will explain on the next slide. Misdemeanor/conduct/infraction information, which something that you definitely have to be honest about because they will run background checks from my understanding. And then finally, military/reapplying students, you will also be given a section to explain if this is applicable to you, kind of how and what happened, and what your current status is. All right, so like I said, manual dexterity requires a 600 character kind of text box to describe any skills that, and actually I don't think that this is required, but I'm sure almost everyone on this Zoom call definitely has some skills under their sleeve that you might not even realize. For example, cooking, sports, woodshop, knitting, dental assisting, scrapbooking, calligraphy, rock climbing, literally anything. The one that you see here is from the previous president. So you can use this as an example, but also feel free to make it your own. All right, so moving on to the second section, which is academic history. Again, pretty straightforward. You will select the high school or high schools that you attended, and then you will select the colleges and universities that you attended, and you must report all institutions, regardless of their relevance to the programs you're applying to, whether the coursework there was transferred to another institution. So essentially, any institution, even if it was a community college during high school or during the summer after freshman year, sophomore year, whatever it may be, you will simply report that and also enter your transcript for each university that you took a class at. And I will explain more about that on the upcoming slides because transcript entry is one of those things that should be straightforward, but can kind of feel a bit of a logistical nightmare. And then finally, standardized tests. Basically, you will just input your score and you will input your dent pin, which is given to you upon taking the exam or upon registering for the exam. So very straightforward and not something you should worry too much about as long as you take the DAT. Okay, let's see. All right, transcript entry. So in order to do this entry part, you can use your advising report. And your advising report can be found on your personal Buckeye link, which I will show you how to do on the next slide, just in case you're unfamiliar. And then both the course code, which you can see over here near my cursor, as well as the course title, they come directly from your advising report. And again, I'll show you exactly the details of that just so that it mitigates confusion. You will also list your AP credit under your freshman year using the 2 letters CR, as you can see where my cursor is over there. And then again, you use your advising report to directly list your AP credit. Or I think IB also applies any college credit that you took in high school. And then, I mean, this is pretty straightforward, but you are going to report all courses on your transcripts and be sure to include courses from which you withdrew, repeated, took over the summer, ungraded labs, test credits, gym courses, orientations, or other non-graded courses. And I'm sure that's not applicable to everybody, but there might be a few things in that list that you might not have thought of. And so you can submit your application before transcripts are received, but you must submit all of the required documents in order to complete your application. So basically that means that your schools will not review your application until it is fully complete. And for it to be fully complete, you must have your transcripts entered and received, as well as your DAT score entered and received. And then in this corner, I have another QR code, which I will show you over here. So like I said, transcripts can be a little bit confusing. So this is another link to the ADSAS website that basically gives you a super in-depth explanation of how to go about this section. And they have a super helpful 4-minute video that will walk you through the entire process of inputting each of your grades from your advising report. Okay, like I said, this is your view on your Buckeye link. As you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, you can simply click the button that says Generate Advising Report, and that will pull up a 1-page document with a bunch of courses that you've taken over the past. So for example, on the right-hand side, you can see I think this is just my freshman year, and I circled General Chem 1 just to show you as an example of how to go about this. So over here, you can see the word chem written out, and then over here, you can see 1210 written out. And if I go back to the previous slide, oh, now it's not showing up. All right, so I'm back on the previous slide, and you can see under course code, I wrote exactly what I saw on the advising report, which was Chem 1210. And then for course title, you will just write General Chem 1, or you can expand it into General Chemistry 1. So I'll go back one more time so that you can see that. And then I just inputted the number of credits as well as the grade. And then here you will see the CAS grade. You do not have to worry about that. That is entirely on the end of the ADSAS application, and they will update that and make it in their own language. So you don't have to worry anything about the CAS grade. Are there any questions so far? I definitely feel like I'm talking pretty quickly, so that can make it overwhelming. Okay, feel free to interrupt me at any point or drop a comment in the chat. All right, so with the transcript entry, when it comes to either senior year or future coursework that you have not taken or are currently taking, you will just select the in progress button to denote those courses, as you can see circled up here. And even if you don't know exactly what courses you're going to take in the future, you can just provide your best guess. So for example, you can see my senior year in progress, but I completely changed my coursework and I am not taking half of those courses. And that's totally okay because you can simply update those dental schools in the future. Okay, So now we're moving on from section 2 to section 3, which is supporting information. And this is the most important section of your application because this is where you basically detail your entire undergrad career. No big deal. All right, so we start with evaluations and then we'll go to experiences, achievements, licenses, and personal statement. I have a slide for each of these sections, so we will talk about this a little more in depth. All right, beginning with evaluations. So this is just a fancy word for letters of rec, and I would highly recommend that you check out our recorded meeting from last semester, which was entirely on how to ask for a letter of rec, what kinds of professors you should ask, and going about that entirely intimidating process. But it doesn't have to be intimidating as long as you're prepared. Also, some dental students will give you the following advice. They will tell you that if you're not sure where you are going to apply to yet, they would recommend that you try your best to get 4 letters of rec, because by getting 4, this will ensure that you will meet nearly every dental school's requirement, which is along the lines of 2 professors in a major science class, like general chemistry, biochemistry, or organic chemistry, something like that. Also a dentist, and then someone else who can speak highly of your character, like a boss or a PI on a research project. And again, this is just advice from some dental students. It's definitely not completely necessary to get 4, although, like I said, if you are not 100% sure where you will be applying to, it might be wise to try to kind of get 4. And so once you've done that, upon entering their information into the AdSAS system, an email will be sent to that person so that they can easily submit the letter directly to your application. And again, I would recommend checking out that recorded meeting because we go into all of the details of kind of requesting that letter. And Sarah, I don't know if you have any extra input because this is her letters of recommendation evaluation portal on the right-hand side.
Yeah, so as Lily said, like 4 is that, well, it's the max you can like add into the AdStats. And I asked 2 science professors, 1 general dentist, and then someone that spoke hard, like knew me personally, which was Margaret Stroh. She was like the advisor that I peer mentored for. But some things I wanted to like add with like the letter letter rec stuff. That I had trouble with. So I know Dr. Jackson, like I told, like she knew that she was writing one for me, and I remember like requesting it like early on when I was applying, and then she like never completed it when the due date I set. So just know that you can keep like requesting. You don't have to like request just once. Like if they don't get it done, like you can keep requesting and they'll get the notification. And then another thing too, like you don't have to have all your letter recs in before like when you submit it, but know that schools won't like consider your application complete until they're all in. So just make sure of that. And then I know for science professors, some schools are kind of weird, like they want them lecture based, which makes sense. So I asked Dr. Callum, and luckily I think we're good for us since I took OChem like lab 2 since it's like its own class, and since there's a lecture part of it, like I'm pretty like it worked for me. So if you want to ask him, I think it'll work for like all the schools then. I'll just be careful like on who you're asking, just because some schools are like weird with the like requirements for the science professors. But yeah, that's all.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, so it sounds like you can submit your entire application without your transcript, without your DAT score, and without all of your evaluations. But again, it just won't be marked complete, and hence dental schools will not review it until all of those things are officially in. So thank you, Sarah, for those added details. Okay, so on to the next section, which is experiences. And this is definitely going to take up the bulk of your time if I had to guess. And it's both enjoyable and also tedious. It's entirely based on the honor system. So when it comes down to equating how many hours you spent doing something, it is based on your own honesty. And when it comes to the description slash key responsibilities that you will have 600 characters to do so. And these two screenshots are taken directly from the AdSAS portal. So hopefully this can be a helpful tool when it comes to kind of denoting all of your activities during undergrad. And Sarah is going to go into more detail about all of these different experience types, as you can see with my cursor. And I will simply hand it off to her.
Okay, so the experience part, I would say, is probably the most important part, like within this like section. So this is basically where you're gonna input everything you've done throughout your undergraduate career. And like as Lily said, there's 7 types: academic enrichment, dental experience, dental shadowing, employment, extracurricular activities, research, and volunteer. So I had most of these, but I don't think it's like, don't be like freaking out if you don't have like like, you know, don't have like one of these. I didn't have like employment, so that was fine. And then within these experiences that you put down, you can highlight 6 of them. And so what I did, I chose like the main activities that meant the most to me and that I knew that I could speak like a lot on and be confident when I'm talking about if I ever got asked them in interviews. Um, and then just some tips. Don't feel like you have to fill this out all in one sitting. I remember like the first day the application opened, I tried to like do this all at once, but it was just like too much. And then along with that, I think the reason why, because I didn't really have like all the information that we needed to fill out like each experience type. So if you haven't already, I would highly suggest making Excel sheets and notes of like all the dates, the times, and like what you did during these activities, to make sure you have them and like they're easy to access when you're filling out the application. And then for those applying this cycle, I know one thing that I wish I did was start organizing and collecting this information and like the supervisor info. I don't think that's like required within the experience, but I just put it down just to make sure if they ever contacted them, they could have that. So that's one thing that I would do, because I know that's one aspect that set me back, was not having like that extra info. Okay, and then just some more notes for the experience part that like I don't know if anyone had questions on, but I just thought might be helpful. So splitting up roles within one organization. So for Prenatal Club, for example, I input separate entries for when I was just a general member, and then like media chair or service chair. And then for calculating hours, this might just be like simple to explain, or you might understand it, but just like, for example, if I shadowed a practice twice over like a long period of time, like at the bottom, for weekly hours, I would just put in 5 hours, like that'd be 5 hours, however, how many, whatever I shadowed that day, and then 2 for the number of weeks. But as long as your hours add up, it'll be fine. And then, oh, this is one thing I wasn't really sure about. So if anyone really knows like what the best thing to do is, but for when you're shadowing 2 different dentists within the same practice, I was personally told to input them as like separate entries, and then each like description, I would just talk about which dentist I shadowed and what I did with them. But I honestly think it's perfectly fine putting them under one and then just like talking about like each dentist within the description. And yeah, just don't, I mean, you don't have to fill up the entire description. Like that's definitely not needed. But I know some of them I definitely did just because like I did a lot, but don't feel like you have to fill up the entire description. And then one important thing to note is just make sure you have everything like right, correct, that like, you know, you don't want to mess anything up, because once you submit, you cannot go back to edit it. You can't go back to see what you've done. But I think I like spelled observer wrong on here, so I think that's fine. But yeah, just make sure everything's correct before you submit.
Awesome, thank you. Also, I see that there are a few questions in the chat, so we will definitely get to those. And so Sarah mentioned creating an Excel sheet, which, if I had to guess, is what most people on the e-board did. But if you want to go above and beyond and make your life even easier, you can use this Google Doc that Lauren Ames, the vice president from a few years ago, made to benefit us all. So basically, let me go back to that original screenshot that I showed you all. Just imagine inputting this onto a Google Doc, and that is exactly what it is. So it's kind of just a comprehensive place where you can edit and update periodically, and it will make your time filling out the application a lot smoother and less stressful. But if you want to just simply stick with an Excel sheet, that is equally as helpful and important to do. All right, so the next section is achievements, and this is definitely a little ambiguous because some things that are considered achievements could also be under your experiences section. So I think that it's really up to your own discretion and maybe just kind of trying to balance the sections a little bit as best as you can. And so this is where you would highlight something like a scholarship or a sports/athletic award, an honorary or dean's list. And with dean's list, basically what you can do is just input it as one section, as you can see here, just one time. And then within the description box, you can list the semesters and years that you were awarded it if that's applicable to you. Um, and if you were in the club for the past few years, something that you could add is the certified suicide prevention gatekeeper through the REACH training. If you choose to partake in the DICE certification through the Multicultural Center, which is something I highly recommend and that we will talk about more this semester, that's another example of something you could add. If you were in a scholars program and you have graduated from it, that's another example. If you've gotten some sort of athletics award through a club team or a varsity sport, that is another example, or a scholarship. And then you can again highlight or star up to 4 of those activities, the things that are just the most important to you. And again, you will have a 600 character description box for each so that you can go into detail. But like Sarah said, do not feel obligated to fill every single character because some people would prefer that you just give the most essential information since they are reading so many applications.
Okay, and then for licenses, I'm sure like a lot of people don't have licenses. I know I didn't, but if you do, you can input them like in the, as you can see in like in the bottom picture. But this could be anything from being a dental hygienist to a yoga instructor, if you have your X-ray license, or if you are a dental assist or something like that. And then the personal statement, I think the best way obviously is to, like, write it out in a separate document and then like paste it in when you're like submitting or applying. So then I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, so it's 4,500 characters. And I definitely do not also feel like you have to use up all of this, but I definitely was pretty close. Yeah, 4,459. But yeah, don't feel like you have to use up all the characters because I don't think that's important. But yeah, as Lily said, it's never too early to start brainstorming. I know I went through like 5 drafts and like I built like my final personal statement was like built through all those drafts. So it's always important to just write what you want to write and then it'll come to you. And then yeah, join our personal statement workshop on March 3rd, like 2021. And then oh yeah, I went to that too and it was really helpful. So I highly recommend going to that.
Thank you so much. Yes, and then in the top right-hand corner, I basically just have the link to the click here thing. So that might provide some insight as you are starting your different iterations. And then just in general, the question for your personal statement is technically in the circle down here. Please explain why you want to pursue a dental career, and we will get more into the nitty gritty within, that personal statement workshop, but this can truly be whatever that question means to you. It doesn't have to directly pertain to dentistry. It can be a very personal statement. All right, so once you've reached this point, you are almost out of the woods and you have done the bulk of the entire application. And this is the final section where you basically submit everything. So a check mark on the right-hand side of the screen means that you have fully completed the application to that school. And again, if you are still kind of hesitant and nervous about not knowing exactly where you are going to be applying to, just ask yourself if you would attend an interview from each of these schools. And if the answer is no, then it's probably best to save the money because, again, it's around $250 per application, and that can get to be pretty expensive. So after you've pressed that submit button and you've waited a week or two around that time frame, some schools are kind enough to have additional short essay questions. So on the right hand of the screen, you can see the short answer essays for OSU. And these are typically pretty short and straightforward. So not all schools have, essay questions. Some will be very straightforward and ask like yes or no questions. So don't be too nervous, but definitely try to add the amount of time it might take you to fill these supplemental applications out into the equation of your overall application. All right, so once you've filled out the AdSAS application and submitted it, and once you've done your supplemental application and paid for that fee, what is next? So now it is out of your hands and you have done everything in your power. You can breathe and relax while you wait for your interview notification. During this time, it's super easy to let your nerves get the best of you, but just be confident and have faith and remember that you have poured your heart and soul into it and it is completely out of your hands. During this kind of weird limbo period where you're waiting for an interview notification, we would highly recommend that you talk to students who have interviewed at those schools that you might be interviewing at, and they might be able to give you a breakdown of the day and calm your nerves, or just in general, when you are trying to decide where you're going to apply to, it is so helpful to reach out to current dental students because you can get kind of a clear perspective that's not muddled by administration. It's a little less biased, and that can be really helpful in making those hard decisions. Okay, and this is just the DAT study group, GroupMe. If you are not in it and you are taking it in the next few months/year, go right ahead. This is the Instagram page, and I am going to scroll back up and check out any questions. So the first one is, if you use Interfolio for letters of rec, how does that work when you fill out the application? I personally I don't have experience with Interfolio. From my understanding, it's pretty seamless. You can just directly import it without seeing that letter. But has anyone else in the meeting right now used it before / have any, better advice about that? Okay, maybe not, which is okay, because if you're using Interfolio, which so many students have before, I'm confident that the transition between the two is very seamless and you don't have to request the letter, I believe. You can just directly input it, but I can look into that more. And then the next question is, what supervisor info should we put for activities done throughout pre-dent clubs such as volunteering? So our current supervisor's name is Sydney McConnell. And if one of the e-board members could find her information on the College of Dentistry website and send that in the chat, that would be great. But if you are watching this video in the future, then you can just Google Sydney McConnell, College of Dentistry, OSU. So would a physics professor count as a science professor for a letter of recommendation? I am 99.9% sure that the answer to that is yes, but does anyone have personal experience with that question? I'm pretty sure that since physics is a prerequisite for every dental school, at least one, then that would mean it would be considered a core requirement. Hence, you can ask for a letter of recommendation from them. But again, if anyone knows the exact answer, that would be great. Someone is asking if microbiology is the same case as physics. And again, because that is a prerequisite for every dental school, I believe, yeah, that is definitely a core science course that you can get a letter of rec from. Do both letters of recommendation have to be from core sciences? It depends on the school, first of all, because not all schools require 2 letters of rec from core sciences. But if the school does require 2, then I believe it does have to be from 2 core science classes. But again, do any of the e-board members or members in the club right now know that for sure?
I think it's different for each school. I know you can like look on their website to see what they want, and sometimes they have like a list of different classes that they'll accept for science. Um, One like struggle I came into contact with was like, for example, West Virginia wanted one from a physics professor, one from a biology professor, and one from a chemistry professor. I didn't know that before I decided I wanted to apply there, and so then I just could not apply. So I would definitely look into the schools that you want to apply to and just see what the requirements are. But most sciences I think count as just science professors, which is pretty average.
Someone asked about genetics. Do you know if that falls under the same realm as what you were saying?
I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, when it comes to the smaller, more personalized courses within like your major, that's where it gets a little tricky because it's so nuanced depending on the school, which makes it a little harder. So if you want to make it easier on yourself in an ideal situation, getting those letters from core science courses would be the best bet. But again, sometimes it's a better choice to have a more intimate connection with the professor in a smaller class. So there's a lot of variables at play, but you can also kind of begin with schools that you certainly know you want to apply to. For example, if you know for a fact you want to apply to OSU, make sure you have those core letter of recs under your belt. And then from there, you can try to build off of that bare minimum. Sorry if that was kind of vague. It gets a little tricky. And then Mela inputted Sydney's information. So her dot number or her name dot number is McConnell.242. Are there any other questions tonight? This was definitely a dense meeting, but hopefully helpful. Okay. If there are no questions, oh, wait. If there are no questions, feel free to log off or stay behind if you'd like to ask one to just the eBoard members. Have a great night. Don't be too nervous about this process because once you have access to the portal, you will feel a lot better because the control will be in your hands at that point. So just trying to be as proactive as possible while also granting yourself grace to not stress too much about it because we are all in the same boat or going to be in the same boat or have been in the same boat. So if we can do it, so can you. Have a good night, everyone.